Welcome to this recording of the presentation for the third Public Information Center for the Active Transportation and Mobility Plan for the uh, Township of Center Wellington. I'll be walking through this presentation with my colleague and going through all the content that was presented at the in-person Public Information Center for anyone who missed it. For this presentation, our agenda is to go through the following pieces. We have the project overview, describing what the Active Transportation and Mobility Plan is, a review of the existing conditions and existing network that we've taken a look at in building our recommendations, our overview of our engagement with the community to date so far, the recommendations that we've made for developing the network and proposing the preferred alternative for the active transportation network, our proposed policies and programs that go towards supporting active transportation, and the few final next steps in this the process for developing the active transportation and mobility plan. Firstly, we'd like to cover what active transportation is. So on this slide, we see all types of different travel modes. They can be human powered and they can be electric assisted as well. It includes things including walking, people using wheelchairs or electric wheelchairs, people using bicycles or e-bikes, people using scooters or e-scooters, rollerblades, or skateboards or e-skateboards, or any of these new devices that are coming into the realm of small and electric assisted. The active transportation and mobility plan that we're developing is going to be a community-focused strategy and a forward-looking long-term vision for active transportation within the Township of Center Wellington. It's meant to be a flexible document, so as new things come up, as new events occur, um, some of the recommendations could be changed or adapted. It's also a community building asset, so we've been engaging with the community, as my colleague's going to present on, and really it's the input from the community that has helped to really form the recommendations of this plan. It's an implementation guide that's going to describe the timing on when we implement these recommendations, and it's also support for existing plans. And we'll also add some of the other plans that are being developed currently to help support the goals of them. So why are we developing an active transportation and mobility plan now? Um, we're looking to shape the township's on and off-road active transportation network and develop recommendations up to 2051. We're looking to guide the planning, the budgeting, and the growth of the physical and social infrastructure to support walking, cycling, and rolling. And we're looking to help the community reach the strategic goals of the township and of the county in building healthy, sustainable, and complete communities. And of course, what we've heard throughout this engagement is that the community wants it. We've been hearing that through 70% of the respondents of the online survey that we'd launched, that 70% wants to use active transportation more. 55% of respondents say that they want to drive less than they currently do, and 32% of students or 32% of students want to increase their walking, cycling, and rolling to school. So hearing all that from the community during this plan development really justifies the need for it. Throughout this process, through engagement with staff, other municipalities and agencies and the county, and community partners in the public, we've developed the vision statement for what's going to be really the guiding statement for active transportation in Center Wellington over the lifetime of this plan. So what the statement that we've developed reads as: the Township of Center Wellington envisions a safe, accessible, and well-connected active transportation and mobility network that serves people of all ages and abilities. Our goal is to connect people to the places they need and want to go, support a healthy, active lifestyle, enhance the overall quality of life, and meet the mobility needs of a growing community. our project schedule can be seen on this slide. We started this back in spring of 2024, had a very thorough community engagement process and plan developed through there. And then we've gone into our technical recommendations while reporting back to the community on these. So we've developed our targets for the types of facilities and services for those facilities that are going to be seen, such as maintenance of bike lanes and the types of amenities that you see along pathways, things like that. We've looked at the network and looked at all of our different options and came back to the community at a previous public information center to really understand what the preferred routes are within the community. That was step 5. We've budgeted and developed costing for what our preferred network is going to look like. And finally, we're reporting back to the community on what our final recommendations or draft final recommendations are going to be before they go to council in summer of 2025. From here, I'll pass it over to my colleague to present on the engagement.
Thank you. So community engagement played an essential role in informing the development of what you'll see here in the draft recommendations for the Active Transportation and Mobility Plan. Over the course of the last year, our project team conducted 26 community engagement sessions, gathering input from diverse groups to ensure that a variety of voices were represented within the ATMP. And through these engagement sessions, we had direct engagement with over 2,000 community members, and we had nearly 8,000 impressions for the project online and on social media. In terms of the engagement activities that we conducted, our team did 6 listening sessions to hear from the community about priorities and concerns. We connected with township and county advisory committees, community groups, and food bank clients. We also hosted 8 community pop-up sessions where we went out into the community to try to meet people where they are. There's not always time to attend the public information center, and you don't always hear about the survey. But by getting out into the community and meeting people where they are, we really aimed to get 4 to 5 minutes of everyone's time, let them know about the project and hear about their mobility needs. And we hosted these pop-ups at various libraries outside of the Fresco, at an English as a second language class, the farmers market, at the Center Wellington community dinner, as well as at one of the county's affordable housing units. We also went and connected with youth. We did 4 in-school workshops with students at Elora Public School and J.D. Hogarth Public School. We also connected with township counselors through one-on-one interviews. Throughout the project, we had an active project webpage on the connectcw.ca page. Through that page, we had an online survey in the fall, and we received 242 responses. We've done outreach throughout the project to representatives of Indigenous communities. And in addition to the community outreach that we've done, throughout the project team has coordinated meetings with the Technical Advisory Committee and the Active Transportation and Environment Working Group. And those committees include township staff, county staff, public health, as well as representatives from various trail operators. And we also hosted 3 public information centers, this being the 3rd and final one. So through all of this outreach and all of this engagement, we heard a lot from the community. And scattered throughout this presentation, you will hear some of the bits of very specific feedback that have informed the recommendations in this draft plan. But at a high level, we also wanted to share with you some of the key priorities that we heard from the community. First of all, we heard that connected routes that are separated from motor vehicle traffic are a real priority. We also heard about the importance of accessible facilities that can be used by people of all ages and all abilities. People were very keen to see clear signage to help them navigate the network easily, both to find the route and to be able to easily access, various trailheads and trail entrances, as well as local destinations. People were keen to see supportive amenities. So it's really important to, have that network, those bike lanes, trails, and sidewalks. But it's also important to have the supportive amenities that make it possible to be out and about in public, walking and biking and rolling, like bike racks, public washrooms, and water fountains. People were also very concerned about visibility along the routes, highlighting a lot of different blind corners that should be addressed, as well as the need for adequate lighting, particularly when people are crossing the road. We heard a lot from people about the year-round maintenance of facilities and trails, and particularly if you are using walking and cycling as your main mode of transportation, being able to use it throughout the summer, throughout the winter is very important. And we also heard throughout all of our consultations about the need to prioritize safer connections to schools so that students can walk, bike, and roll.
All right, from here, we're going to go into some of the more technical aspects about what we currently see in the existing network that really help to inform our recommendations that we'll be making and presenting on a bit later on in this plan. So for reviewing the existing active transportation routes in the community, we followed provincial guidance, which is known as the Ontario Traffic Manual, Book 18, which provides guidance on cycling facilities and what they should look like and where they are appropriate within the province. So we looked at the current facilities to make sure that they're compliant and see which ones aren't compliant with that provincial guidance. We looked at where there's the network gaps and the barriers within the network. We looked at socioeconomic trends related to population, income, and stuff like that. And we also heard and summarized what we heard from the community on the existing network, and that really went in informing the recommendations that we'll be making. So when we look at the current types of facilities that the township has, we see almost about half of them or so are currently sidewalks, which of course do not permit cycling on them. And then a lot of the remaining facilities are made up of multi-use paths and trails, which do allow cycling and walking. Um, there's a high number of signed and shared use lanes where cyclists have to mix in with traffic, um, about 22 or 23 kilometers of those. And then the remaining ones are quite low, which are facilities that the township has been working on building more recently. Things like paved shoulders, on township roads and dedicated bike lanes and cycle tracks, which are the new type of facility you can see in the bottom here towards the left, these ones, where you're separated by a curb from the vehicle lanes, and sometimes there's a buffer in there too. So that's the most recent one that was built, or I think the only one that was built so far in the township is on St. David Street in Fergus. When we look at the findings of this analysis, we noted a couple of important things. We looked at the degree of separation of the facility based off of the speed of traffic on the roadway, as well as the number of motor vehicles that are using the roadway as well. We also made sure that the facilities were wide enough and that the type of facility was appropriate. And we found that about 59%, 16.2 kilometers, are compliant with provincial guidance, where about 41% are not. And we see largely on that 41% is made up of the signed and shared use lanes where cyclists have to mix in with traffic. So those are on roads that under guidance, it's not appropriate to be mixing with traffic or isn't the best practice. So what we're looking at here is how to create that a safer condition for people, either using those roadways or putting them on another roadway where we can provide some more separation. So these can be done through separation techniques such as bollards or concrete barriers with quick-build bike lanes, or by a larger reconstruction to create separation, or by working to reduce vehicle speeds and reduce the number of vehicles using a road through measures called traffic calming. When we spoke with the community, there were a number of key barriers that we heard to using active transportation. Um, some of these barriers included things like the gaps in the sidewalk and trail network where the trails aren't continuous or sidewalks are continuous and people suddenly have to share the roadway. Um, the lack of safe and proper sidewalk and active transportation infrastructure in general. Also hearing that there's a lot of aggressive driving and speeding of motor vehicles through people's neighborhoods and the streets that they're on. Um, the community design somewhat discourages using active transportation. A lot of people just use vehicles for now, and it's the feeling that the town has been designed for the vehicle rather than with facilities for cycling and walking. We heard that there's minimal connections that feel safe across the Grand River, which splits Elora and Fergus into two. And that the trails that currently exist, while they're great, they're starting to become so popular and they're too narrow for the number of people who are using them. So looking at upgrading those as well. Within a couple of maps here, you can see how we've mapped out and taken a look at the existing facilities in the network. So a number of things shown here, showing the sidewalks, where there's existing bike lanes and trails and signed/shared on-road routes. And then here is another similar map for Fergus. So when we're reviewing the gaps within the network itself, some of the ones that we're seeing, the major gaps that we're seeing are and hearing about are the lack of connections to key destinations that aren't accessible by the existing network. We're hearing that the Grand River divides communities with, again, that need for crossing opportunities. County roads, major roads under the county's jurisdiction, are challenging because they need to be crossed, or the township just doesn't have the ability to add facilities if it's a county road. So they can be gaps within the network. And then also just the distances between communities, not necessarily between Elora and Fergus, but there's a larger distance from Fergus to Bellwood, and then there's even larger distances to urban areas and neighboring municipalities, such as down to Guelph or Waterloo. So through those rural areas, there also needs to be some thoughts on how we connect to those urban centers. So I'm not going to go through all of each of the socio-economic trends that we took a look at, but just listed here are some of the key ones. So we looked at indicators for population density, looking at household income, the, the population density of immigrants and recent immigrants who can face barriers to transportation, as well as youth and seniors, where the youth might not have their driver's license yet or need some other way to get around by walking or biking. It's great for kids to be able to participate in those and get to school that way. And then seniors who might not be able to drive themselves anymore, still looking for ways to get outside and get around their communities on sidewalks, and who might have mobility challenges and use a mobility scooter, for example. And we often see people who use mobility scooters also benefit from having these multi-use pathways and protected bike lanes because they feel safer on those. So I'll walk through now our process on how we developed the active transportation and mobility network, the draft for it that's being presented in this public information center. So first off, really the principles that we look at when we're developing a network come down to some of the key ones that we have listed here. Um, the first one, we want to prioritize routes that connect to each other and that offer direct and continuous access to key destinations across the community. So really the network has to be connecting to each other and then connecting to those destinations. Um, we want to focus on safety and accessibility, making sure what we are proposing has enough separation to feel comfortable for users of all ages and all abilities. We've been incorporating the public inputs and feedback feedback from partners in this plan to ensure that the network reflects the needs of the users. We've been favoring routes along municipally owned roads, so trying not to propose too much on county roads because that's not necessarily within the township's control for when those construction projects happen. We've also been ensuring that the network is equitable and accessible for all community members, regardless of their different needs or status. And another key point is topography. So this is related to how steep a hill can be along a roadway, especially hearing about some of the challenges in Fergus and some of the slopes coming up from the Grand River. We've considered that as in many of our network recommendations to make sure that we're offering routes and prioritizing routes that people can bike comfortably up instead of the very steep ones. We also have this concept of network types. So we think of the types of networks that come together to build an active transportation network being made up of these two different types of networks. So one is going to be our spine and connector network. So these are the routes that are often the most continuous ones, but that often also means that they're on the busier roads. So there's a need for higher degrees of separation for those routes. So it might be something like a protected bike lane, a multi-use pathway, or a cycle track along these roads. But since these are on major roads, there can still be that discomfort for people who aren't comfortable cycling next to traffic, even if you have a little bit of separation in the form of a curb or a barrier. And that's where we also look at the Calm Streets network. So this is really our network to connect people along the local roads and the local neighborhood roads within the community. Um, as well as taking advantages of any trails that are completely separated from traffic. So when a route is proposed along one of these roadways, we want to make sure that any traffic along there um, is going at a slower speed, making them through traffic calming devices such as speed bumps or speed cushions. And we also want to make sure that there's no cut through traffic or shortcutting happening along these local neighborhood roadways, and that it's only the local traffic and the people who live on the street that are using it. So then it even becomes unlikely that if someone's cycling along the neighborhood road, then it's unlikely that they might even encounter another vehicle or a motor vehicle. So there's that high degree of separation and comfort and very low traffic stress because of that. So when we're looking at our separated types of facilities, we have some examples here. So as a pedestrian, having wide sidewalks that are separated from the roadway is important when there's higher traffic speeds. And then as a cyclist, we can look at facilities such as multi-use pathways, which are often in the boulevard with a buffer to separate them from the roadway, a protected bike lane, which could be on the roadway itself at the same level as vehicles, but has a concrete barrier and some other vertical separation to separate them from traffic. And then we might have a cycle track, which I mentioned a bit earlier, but these are the ones where you have a curb separating them from the roadway, and they're separated both vertically as well as horizontally from the roadway to provide some more buffer space. When it comes to on-road routes, on top of our the typical painted bike lanes, we're also proposing these routes called within the Calm Streets network, and they're often called and referred to as neighborhood bikeways. Um, they're not just for cyclists, is what I'll emphasize here. Um, they these routes, the treatments for these routes, they focus on making sure any vehicle speeds are low through traffic calming measures, such as these speed cushions that we saw in Fergus. As well as that there's no cut through traffic and shortcutting through the neighborhood. And that might mean things like traffic diverters to make sure that someone can't continue all the way along the street through multiple intersections for a long distance, because that's when you can pick up speed. Instead, at each intersection, they'll suggest, okay, the driver has to go left or right at these intersections. They can't continue through. And that just encourages and makes sure that it's just local traffic on that street and the people who live on that street, not people who are using it as a shortcut. And that's so it has the benefit for cyclists by reducing the number of vehicles and the speeds of vehicles, but also people walking and also people who live on these streets, because nobody likes having a lot of traffic that's speeding and using their street as a shortcut. So really it's benefiting the locals, people on the street, as well as people who are traveling through the street by active transportation. And then when we get into trails, we're looking at two types of trails here. So the first type of trail that we're focusing on are multi-use trails. So these ones are the ones that are wider. They might have a gravel surface or they might have a paved surface, depending on context. And they're often recommended to be winter maintained and include a variety of amenities, which I'll touch on in a bit. And then we have our recreational trails. So these ones are typically used for walking, mostly used by pedestrians and hikers, people taking their dogs for a walk, stuff like that. They can be up to about 2.5 meters wide or 2.4 meters wide, and they'll mostly be gravel and natural surfaced. Um, they have a more natural experience with the surrounding area, having closer encounters with the trees and plants and stuff that you can experience along the corridor. But they often have fewer amenities than we look at for the multi-use trails. And we really want to emphasize that Center Wellington is really building off the key and important trails that exist within the community. So really leveraging those assets, which we hear that the community really loves. Um, there's we also heard from people that currently the key trails they're not paved, so that can be an accessibility challenge. Um, and some people would like to see a pave for people who might be using mobility scooters, wheelchairs, stuff like that. Um, but on the other hand, we also heard from people saying that they want to have a more natural experience with these trails and have a more natural feel. So we have to balance those two within our recommendations. And overall, we heard quite wide support for wider trails that can be quite narrow in locations. So within our recommendations, we'll definitely be looking at trying to accommodate more people on the trails because we see such a high demand for them. So within our proposed network map here for Elora, we can see some of the key recommendations that we're making. So really trying to have these multi-use pathways on busier roadways like Colburn and Geary and County Road 7 over here, while having the less separated facilities on some of the more quiet roads. Key ones being McNabb Street will be a neighborhood bikeway, for example, and so will Church Street. which provide some of these connections to some of the key trails within the community. So looking at the Elora Cataract Trail, we're showing it as a solid line here because we're saying it's an existing active transportation facility. And outside of the urban areas of Elora and Fergus, we really want to focus on maintaining the natural feel of the Elora Cataract Trail because right next to it is going to be a nice direct multi-use pathway that's paved for Colburn Street. The couple of considerations that we want to make and recommend for Elora Cataract Trail are making sure that it's widened out a bit because we do see that high demand for the use there. Meanwhile, on the south side of Elora, and connecting over to Fergus, we have the Trestle Bridge Trail. And it's an existing trail, but we're showing it as a future facility using these dashed lines here to say that we're looking for that trail to be upgraded and likely paved in the future. And that's to create another one of those year-round and accessible connections between South Elora and over to Fergus, to make sure that people living on that side of the river have access to services that they need to. When we look at Bellwood, we see those trails that we mentioned coming into the communities, and then you can see that we're looking to create some connections between the two sections of the trail. So, or the Elora Cataract Trail, to get people across, hearing that a lot of people had concerns about this gap. So once you get off the Elora Cataract Trail at Beatty Line, you'll be able to take a neighborhood bikeway on St. George Street, which will be a nice calm street all the way across. And then we'll have options to get people up north to the connection to the Elora Cataract Trail on the east side, up along Gzowski, for example, or Victoria Terrace. So we'll have those options and make sure that people have ways to get there. Some other key recommendations that we'll be making in Fergus, it's hard to see down here, but we have what's called a feasibility study project identified for a bridge to be restored at the heritage property along the river here at it's a old cottage, I believe. And they'll be providing a new good connection across the river for people from one side to the other, whereas there's challenges with some of these other crossings because they're existing major bridges. We do want to see the cycling cycle track facilities on St. David Street extended to the north and the south, all the way down into South Fergus, where there's new development areas that will be coming in. And then we are also looking at Scotland Street Bridge as potential for a future crossing that supports active transportation, either as cycle tracks along the bridge or a multi-use path along one side of the bridge to get people across, since we're hearing that it's likely going to be replaced soon from the county. And then in Bellwood, we're seeing some or hearing from residents in Bellwood that there's need for safer ways to get across the river here too. So we really want to leverage and make sure that there's emphasis on improving the existing bridge through Bellwood as opportunities come up. So that might be in the short term, trying to make sure that traffic's going slowly along there. And in the long term, whenever that bridge comes up for reconstruction or there's an opportunity to retrofit it, looking at a separated facility. So it might be a cycle track along here. It might also be a multi-use pathway, but it'll be something that's determined at a later stage when that bridge ultimately comes up to be reconstructed. Also noting that there'll be development in the north of Fergus, or north of Bellwood, that's coming in, and we'll be looking for some desired active transportation facilities north, south, and east, west through these areas as well. Right, and then we have our policies and programming recommendations. So these are the things that you don't see built, but happen in the background to support active transportation in the community. So for sidewalks, we really heard that there's a strong desire for creating more accessible sidewalks and crossings for people walking throughout the community. So both hearing that there needs to be more crossings of roadways as well as the existing crossings at signalized intersections, that the timing for these have to be focused on accommodating people with children and seniors. So using the timing to make sure that someone who's walking at a slower speed than average can be able to cross within the time given for pedestrians to cross there. Some other key recommendations that making are to make sure that new sidewalks are designed to be accessible. We're really seeing guidelines on accessibility for sidewalks leaning towards 1.8 meters as a minimum for a sidewalk width. And then as there's sidewalks in more higher pedestrian demand areas, um, make sure those sidewalks can be 2 meters or wider to accommodate those high levels of people walking. Um, we also want to make sure that there continues to be emphasis on accessible intersections with what we call here tactile walking surface indicators, but these are the plates with the domes that you see at intersections and at crossings that are being retrofitted in. And then making sure that there's safety and accessibility upgrades at the crossings, including longer and intersections, making sure that there are longer pedestrian phases. For maintenance of facilities, we heard quite a lot this past year that there's need for better maintenance along sidewalks and the active transportation facilities within the township, and that there's a strong support for year-round maintenance for people to be able to get around in the winter as well. So when we're making these recommendations, we set targets that the township should seek to meet for the best practices in maintaining facilities. So that includes things like regular sweeping and patrol for issues, ideally a couple times a year, making sure that potholes and bumps and cracks that are too large within sidewalks and pathways are repaired. Making sure that there's annual trimming of tree branches and growth within a trail, a bike facility, or a sidewalk. And then as we get into our winter maintenance recommendations, we're recommending things like targets for when snow clearing should be done within 8 to 24 hours of a storm based on the type of route that and the importance of the route within the network, and trying to treat ice patches within 3 hours of a storm or once you become aware of the issue, and applying preventative ice treatment in anticipation of forecasted storms. So these are targets that we're setting, but we all also recognize that there's exceptional circumstances and major storms that come through. So it's not to say that these targets will be met every time, but it's something that the township will be working towards. And then this next piece is for amenities that support active transportation within the township. So important things for active transportation and cycling are things like bike parking, so people have somewhere to leave their bike safely at a destination or at their place of where they live. Um, Things like wayfinding, so signage to make sure people know which way to go for destinations as they're riding their bike. Lighting, that's an important safety piece that people should for people to feel safer. Washrooms and potable water for drinking where servicing exists. Rest areas, climate protection, so that's shade by trees or shelters, as well as uh, features that supports the knowledge and the experience and the culture of Centre Wellington and heritage. So we've developed these recommendations for amenities to be placed at certain locations. So that could be a major hub for amenities, which are often township facilities where there's existing servicing, such as town hall or community centers or some parks. Minor hubs are going to be located at the intersections of key active transportation routes. So these are locations where servicing might not currently exist, So things such as washrooms and potable water aren't available. Um, and then also long routes. So some of the key things along routes that we want to see that are provided more frequently are wayfinding signs. So as people travel, they know where they're going. Lighting, so people feel safe using that route. Rest areas, because we know not everyone has the same stamina levels. So we want to be able to provide a place for someone who might not be able to walk far distances to stop and rest as they go along their trip, and make sure that those rest areas have a variety of seating types. So that might include benches. It might include the more types of like reclining chairs that you can see in some parks, and even sort of a three-quarter sitting position or bar height type seating where someone's not sitting down all the way, because we know not everyone is able to do that. And then climate protection. So that could be in shade in the form of trees, or shelter from things like rain. And for secondary plans, which is referred to as like a planning term for large areas that are being developed, and other new developments coming in. Um, we've really heard that the community sees new growth areas as an opportunity to make sure that as these new areas are built, they're built with good sidewalks and active transportation facilities. So we want to ensure things like they have direct active transportation routes through the communities. So on this slide, you can see in this figure through here that people can take a direct active transportation route using things like a cut through between houses or through parks, or what'll hopefully be a calm neighborhood street that we're recommending should be designed automatically for slower speeds. And then having east-west connections that use the same type of places and opportunities to have direct active transportation routes that aren't on the busy roads. We want to have wider and accessible sidewalks, making sure that all the sidewalks are built within the new communities properly, and that when we do have these busier roads, such as a collector or arterial road, that they provide cycling facilities that are separated and keep people off of the busy roadways. And then we also have developed a wayfinding strategy. So that is telling people in a system of signage that uh, directs people and gives guidance on how to get to certain destinations. So it helps people orient themselves and get from where they're starting to their destination point. So we have things like recommendations for signs that have directional arrows to each type of destination, how long that distance is going to be, plus how much time it takes to get there by cycling or walking. And then as you approach a turn, you'll have another arrow sign. This might be forward or left or right, to let people know that you should be turning on from the street you're on onto another street or trail. And then a confirmation sign after you made that turn, just to let people know that they're still on the right track and on the right path to get there. And then in terms of trail signage, making sure that there's signage at the trailhead at the start of the trail to let people know how long it's going to be, and a trail map, as well as frequent uh, distance markers along the trail too. And then finally, our recommendations that we have for education and promotion programs that help support the culture of cycling and active transportation. So what we want to emphasize here is the township. It might not be their role specifically to operate all these programs, but they have the capacity, or the resources, I should say, to help support others who are working in the space. So a number of the programs that we want to focus on are partnered with other organizations to be able to offer these education programs in a more effective way than the township could do by themselves. So some of those things might be a general awareness campaign, but also school-based programs making sure that there's programs to teach kids on how to safely bike and walk to school, and creating the infrastructure and the programs for them to get there. Things like a bike bus, which is a group of kids with adult volunteers who bike to school together, or walking school bus, similar thing, but with walking. And making sure streets that access schools can be designed in a way that are safe for those kids to ride on. Open streets events are something that we've heard interest about, and having those happen again. So um, taking small sections of streets, and perhaps closing them down to vehicles for a day and making them pedestrian only, or cyclists and pedestrians, to have a wide street for people to cycle and walk along. We're looking to create a bicycle hub and a bicycle shop with or I shouldn't say a private shop, but sort of a bicycle community shop, where people, volunteers, can offer services like bike repair and workshops on how to fix a bike for people them to be able to learn themselves. And we really see these developing in a lot of communities that have a well-established bike culture, but in not so much yet in Center Wellington. So what we're suggesting in the meantime is to sort of have these bike repair pop-ups for people who don't have access or aren't able to pay for a full bike repair themselves. This gives them access to an affordable way to have work with volunteer and get some repairs on their bikes that they might not be able to pay for. And then, of course, all this is important to be partnered with supporting bike shops and supporting groups in the community that offer a lot of these services already. And then finally, for our next steps, we're looking to finalize this active transportation and mobility plan um, very soon. And then also we will be presenting it to council for their consideration in June, and then going back to approval for approval from council in the following council meeting. So thank you very much for watching and listening to this presentation, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions at any of these emails below.